Welcome back, folks. It's a pleasure to introduce Danielle Benecke from Baker McKenzie Machine Learning to do our keynote address. Really excited about this one. Danielle, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And hi, everyone. It's so great to be here. I'm really, really excited to have this opportunity to connect with you all. Some very quick background on me to begin. I lead a team at Baker McKenzie that's called Baker ML. And this is a practice group and an internal capability that formally launched last year, though it is part of a much bigger AI/ML strategy and program that dates back almost a decade at this point. And Baker ML is a multidisciplinary team of data scientists, engineers, lawyers, service designers, ops people. And our purpose within that broader Baker McKenzie program is to pilot business models that combine the firm's expertise and data with machine learning and other advanced AI, including recent advances around foundation models. And what we'll do is dig in a little bit more practically on what that means later on. And then before Baker ML, I practiced as an IP and technology lawyer at Baker McKenzie, and that practice included advising a number of our biggest technology clients on the development and commercialization of AI. So I've been thinking about AI for most of my career. And in more recent years, that thinking has focused more around how we might leverage that technology in our business and in our industry. Or to really put it another way, what does it actually mean to be a lawyer in an AI-enabled world? What does it mean to deliver high-value legal services in an increasingly AI-enabled world? And we'll come back to that question in a moment, because first I want to share with you three things that I'm hoping to get out of our time today, and specifically for you to get out of this session. So number one, I want to correct what I see as a few myths and confirm a few truths around what we're seeing with the technology and the market. Number two, I would like you to disagree, ideally strongly, with at least one thing that I say. Because one of the great values of this forum and other forums like it is that we all challenge our biases and we all learn something. And then the third goal, and actually the primary goal that I have today, is for you to take something away that's going to be useful to you at the strategy table, whatever corner of our fragmented, balkanized legal industry you are in. So let me start by setting some quick commercial context for our conversation, because there is often that tendency in our industry and in other industries to view AI and other technology waves in isolation from wider market dynamics. So a few points to set the scene. We have demand for legal services, both in-house and private practice. It's never been higher, and it's going to continue to grow. For instance, since 2008, there's been 1% average year-on-year growth across AmLaw, with even greater growth in the size of in-house teams. Though, of course, willingness to pay is down within our industry as a whole. Net spend optimism is trending down by 12%, and of course, realization is under pressure too. And at the same time, costs are going up from wages, from inflation. Law firm technology spend is going up. That's something we feel particularly acutely at Baker McKenzie. And when we look at the other already digitized industries before us, it is looking likely that north of 15% will ultimately become the norm. There's talent too, right? Talent, more mobile, less loyal. From 2015 to 22, for instance, we as an industry saw a 45% increase in likelihood for associates to leave. And 20% of laterals changed firms when they weren't even thinking about moving. And then the headline margins still remain high. So global 200 margins have reached an all-time high of 39 to 40%. But against this backdrop, we've been seeing these staggering advances in AI that do seem poised to capture certain tasks that have traditionally formed part of the legal and other professional services workflows. And you might have actually seen some of these recent studies that have sought to quantify that commercial impact. You might have seen this March 2023 Goldman Sachs study suggesting that 44% of legal tasks could be automated in the US and Europe. Perhaps you saw this Princeton, Wharton, NYU paper that same month putting our industry at the top of the list of those most exposed to recent AI advances. And then I'm sure you haven't missed the array of other articles, blog posts, and commentary on the subject too. Now, these are all others' viewpoints. They're not mine. And I'm not here to dig into the specific strengths and weaknesses of the methodologies used and the conclusions in those specific studies. But I do have a broad point of view on the impact of AI in our profession. And to sum it up, this is not optional. I think that's pretty clear. The advance of technology within that commercial context that I've just laid out, it really does create objective conditions for disruption. And we'll take a look at what that means shortly. But for now, I want to go back to this core question for today. And I think in asking this question, I think it's really important that we're not just turning our minds to what AI is doing or what AI will do to the practice of law. Perhaps more importantly, we should be asking as a legal industry, as law firms and other service providers, what should those providers of the future look like? How can these technologies enhance what we do, which is at its heart to be a trusted advisor for our clients? As we all know, trust is the bedrock of the attorney-client relationship. Our business is driven by trust-based relationships. And so I think another way of framing this question might be, what does it mean to be a trusted advisor in an AI-enabled world? And we at Baker McKenzie actually think that is the question from which all answers about how we deploy and how we control these technologies flow, and one that needs to be answered in order to achieve industry-wide change. And what I want to do now is share with you a few thought models around how we've been approaching this over the past several years, because I think the work that we've been doing to answer this fundamental question, which we first posed both to ourselves and the wider industry back in 2017, is actually one of the reasons we were less surprised than other players about what we've seen recently in the technology and in the market. I am going to dig into the technology a little bit more, so I do want to set some basic working definitions. And I took a look at the audience list, and we do have a pretty wide spectrum of sophistication when it comes to AI and its deployment. So I'm going to rattle out a few business-friendly one-liners in case it's helpful for anyone joining. So technical experts, just bear with me a minute. So I find it helpful to think about a series of concentric circles. So if we imagine as an outer circle the whole field of artificial intelligence, and put simply, AI is computers that use math to do useful things, math or algorithms, things that we previously thought only humans could do or that were beyond the capabilities of humans. And then we can zoom in from there to machine learning. That is an increasingly important field of AI. It uses a combination of complex algorithms and large data sets to train mathematical models that make predictions. And by making those predictions, the ML model, which is in essence a computer program, can perform different tasks. In that way, the computer learns to do things without explicit programming. And as we zoom in further, there is a very specific set of ML techniques called deep learning. And that uses complex networks of algorithms. Sometimes these algorithms are called neural nets. You might have seen that quite a bit as they mimic the structure of human neural networks in the brain. And then if we zoom in even further, we have transformers. That is a type of deep learning model. And as I'm sure everyone here has heard a million times over at this point, the T in GPT stands for transformer. And if you are working in any organizations that need an even simpler working definition of AI, particularly for lawyers who are not interested in getting too technical, here's one we like to use. It's just combining data with math, run on computers to do useful things very fast without getting tired. Okay, so with that out of the way, I think it's really important for us to understand where we're at now in terms of the arc of technology progression, because that is the only way we have a compass to figure out where we might be going next. And I don't want to get too technical, but in short, we've seen 3 distinct waves of AI since the term was coined. The first wave was mainly about rules-based learning. That is, computers needed to be explicitly programmed to do useful things. And there were obvious limitations to that. It's really, really hard to make progress with rules-based AI, and autonomous vehicles is a classic example. For many years, researchers tried to teach cars how to drive themselves by thinking about and programming every single interaction a car might have on the road. But of course, that's an impossible and extremely time-consuming and expensive task. And then the concept of machine learning started to come into view sort of from the 1990s and started to gain a little bit of traction and show increasing promise. And what that concept was basically, by rather than explicitly programming computers to do tasks, we could instead expose algorithms to large data sets and train mathematical models to make predictions. And by making those predictions, the models learn how to perform different tasks. And of course, the 3 things that have driven these increasing advances in machine learning models and what they're capable of are data, algorithms, and computing power. Basically, by increasing the amount of data, increasing the complexity of the algorithms, and increasing the compute or the processing power, that has enabled the creation of increasingly powerful models. And this is just here another visual illustrating how increasing compute power has enabled that development of increasingly powerful models. I also want to show you this visual as it puts GPT and some of the other major commercial models like Google's Palm and Anthropic's Claude, plus some open source models such as Meta's Llama, it puts him in the context of a much broader evolutionary tree and arc of development. Okay, so I told you I wanted to bust some myths today. So let's start with this one. As I'm sure you all appreciate, the staggering capabilities we've seen these past several months did not come from nowhere. Hindsight is 2020, and connecting the dots backwards is always much, much easier. And I think even the engineers were surprised, shocked even, about some of the capabilities that we've seen, or at least the compressed time frame in which we've seen them. But what we have seen since November 2022 is really an opening up of broader public awareness of something that a lot of us in the industry, including at Baker McKenzie, have been talking about for a while. And what that is there have been in the past several years fundamental advances in AI, and more specifically machine learning and the adjacent field of natural language processing, which have been impacting and will increasingly impact our industry and many others, but especially professional services and knowledge or expert industries that involve cognitive tasks. Put simply, a really big part of our business involves interpreting and generating language. And machines are just getting extremely good at that. And that brings us to the second myth I want to dispel. And to do that, I want to share with you a little bit about how we came to invest in my team, in Baker ML, and other elements of our AI program. So let's go back to this visual for a moment. Several years ago, we at Baker McKenzie started to see some of the earlier AI advances, such as DeepMind's AlphaGo in 2015 and AlphaZero in 2017, and Google's BERT model in 2018. And we started to form a view about how these and other future potential advances, particularly in the ML deep learning space, might impact our profession and might interact with the wider market dynamics. And we started to see some early capabilities around things like word embeddings and image processing. And we saw financial services, followed by healthcare, followed by consulting, start to invest more in predictive ML. And then, of course, anyone in the audience today who is in the e-discovery or M&A or business and spend management fields in those spaces, you would be familiar with the earlier first waves of ML in our own industry from sort of like the 2017, 2018 mark, and even in some cases earlier than that. So what did we do at Baker McKenzie when we started kind of seeing these early signals? So we put together an ML task force to consider, what does this arc of development mean for the future of our business and our industry? And I wanted to share a few simple thought models that we developed back then, which I think still hold true and are in fact reinforced by the latest developments that we are now seeing in the technology and seeing in the legal market. So the first one is lawyers, both in-house and in firms, have since the beginning of our profession delivered 4 key things. Knowledge, we tell the client what the law says. Labor, we perform tasks, both legal and non-legal. Prediction, we anticipate what might happen based on the law or how it might evolve. And judgment, we tell the client what to do. And even back in 2017, it was clear that machine learning and other types of AI were starting to disaggregate many tasks that have traditionally made up the first 3 parts of that value chain: knowledge, labor, prediction. These 3 are essentially inputs into the 4th, judgment. And judgment is more complex. It is far and above the most valuable thing that we as lawyers and legal professionals provide. It requires the ability to contextualize the law within the client, the market, and society. And that is, even given the latest advances, extremely difficult for a machine still. So the dynamic that we saw developing then, which is now in 2023 accelerating, is that knowledge, labor, and prediction will be increasingly AI-driven and optimized, and the work and value of human lawyers is aggregating in the judgment layer. We at Baker McKenzie call this ML-enabled judgment, and we believe that this is the high-value service that law firms and in-house teams of the future will deliver more and more over time. And in fact, one of the recommendations of our ML task force back in 2017 was that the firm should start preparing over the ensuing years, so with a view to 2022, 2023, for a future in which what we sell would increasingly be ML-enabled judgment. And that is what has informed initiatives such as our cloud and our data strategy, and ultimately Baker ML 2, which formally launched last year when we started hiring the core team. And the conclusion that our firm came to back then was that the technology was not likely to immediately disrupt our core business, but that we did expect a much more fundamental shift to begin within that 5 or 6 year timeframe, so by 2022, 2023. And that's actually the message that we put out to the market then too. So here's just a few examples of some of the press and the thought leadership that I was involved in. And then, of course, here we are now, 5 to 6 years after that task force. And, I do think it's fair to say that we got some things right. I don't want to overplay, though, here. Our bet was machine learning broadly and machines getting better at cognitive tasks. And that's pretty obvious. We could never have predicted the profound capabilities and paradigm shift around transformer models specifically. But of course, law firms have used AI for quite some time. In some domains, as I said earlier, almost a decade. But I think until now, we as an industry have really not been using it at scale for things like market analysis, finance, performance management, ops, service provision, to name a few. And why is that? Is it the technology? Is it something else? Is it a mixture of the two? I think it is this. What we have sold historically has often been less quantifiable than what other industries sell. So we as an industry, we just haven't had the impetus to digitize in the same way that other industries have. We have been protected by our words. And so now, though, we have the technology really starting to crack that open. We are seeing fluency and action, not just search and find. And access, of course, is being democratized. Historically, our leadership has really struggled to understand the opportunity around AI/ML. But consumer applications like ChatGPT and Bard have really started to crack that open too, because now we have a clear demonstration of capability in the hands of everybody. I do, though, think that to keep moving forward, our leadership does need to have a much deeper understanding of the technology in order to ask the right questions, because lack of understanding tends to lead to the wrong question. The wrong question here is, what technology do we need? The right question is always, what problems are we solving for? And law firms and other players should use AI and other technology when it makes sense and when it delivers better outcomes for our clients or ourselves. And I think this is a good juncture for me to talk about the third myth I want to dispel today. This one may be a little bit more controversial. So my view on this is that law firms think clients want AI and clients think they want AI. But if you actually look behind that, and I hope you'll agree with me, what clients really want is the same thing they've always wanted, right? Which is better, faster, cheaper. This is design thinking 101, right? Like, what they need is the best option to solve for those things. And it could be AI, but more often than not, I think it's still going to be that really efficient combination of people, process, and technology. Here's another myth we tackled a little bit earlier. My view on this, maybe AI will replace lawyers at some future point in time. But at least based on the current technology, I think that's unlikely. And fully acknowledging my bias here, I actually think it's even more unlikely that AI will replace law firms. You may have seen this recent Gartner report. And however you view these kinds of reports, I do think we are still in a hype cycle around foundation models or generative AI, or however you want to group these technology developments. I think the dust is starting to settle a little bit from some of that initial excitement and even hysteria. And I think now it's time to kind of get to the real work of unlocking some of those opportunities that we see. And I think the other point that's really useful to draw from this too is we in the industry are still in the very early innings of a lot of the building block technology that we need to realize a lot of the AI potential, particularly around cloud enablement. There's a lot of work still to be done there. And as a general matter, I think it's quite clear that AI will be able to serve as parts of the process that sit under the legal services that many of us sell, but stitching all of that together and building trust, I think that's going to likely remain a human skill for quite some time. The other thing I wanted to point out, and you will appreciate this if you've worked closely with these kinds of models, you will recognize that the higher value use cases that you want to access, those require significant adaptation or customization of generally available models. And the general rule is, the greater the domain complexity or bespoke needs you have to serve, and the higher the accuracy or the performance quality required, the more things you're going to have to do to fix the models. And to illustrate, I just want to give you an example of one of a series of kind of quick and dirty performance tests that my team did, as soon as GPT-3 and then 3.5 and then 4 were released, just to better understand how those models performed out of the box. Really, what is that bottom layer of understanding just based on the original training data? And what we did here was have the model attempt one of our many global multi-jurisdictional surveys that we do every year to power different service lines. And the output was scored against the latest version of the survey created in the usual way. And so what you're seeing here is just a sample of some of the scoring for a select set of questions across some select jurisdictions. And the scoring goes from 5, which is spot on, both substantively and in terms of form, down to NA, meaning largely irrelevant, to -2, which is how we scored fatal errors that were likely to cause significant risk. And just to confirm here, we're not proposing to use raw foundation models for legal research. Outside of retrieval use cases where you have a validated source of truth to point the model at, legal research is actually an inherently bad idea for foundation models. But all we wanted to do here was really confirm our instincts around the wide spectrum of baseline performance that these models have across different geos and different practice areas. And you can probably imagine, for the kinds of jurisdictions and the kinds of practice areas that have high availability of relevant data on the web, the performance is actually pretty good. But down the long tail of Baker McKenzie geos and practices, and so we're across 77 offices in more than 45 countries, there's a lot of variation. The other thing I wanted to point out is that along with retrieval, which I just mentioned, there are some really other interesting techniques emerging around how you might customize models for different use cases. But whatever bucket of techniques you use, domain expertise, as in legal subject matter experts, and data are still critical enablers. And certainly in my business model, getting access to those individuals to spend time on R&D and access to the right data in the right format is not at all a trivial set of problems. There's also the governance piece, and I'm sure that many of you are thinking about that very deeply in your own organizations. I've talked about this already a lot in the market, so I'm not going to cover that here. But in short, it is maturing in tandem with the technology, and you need to think about it. You need to figure it out. You need to right-size it for your organization and what you want to do. And your cloud maturity is going to be a big factor in that as well. So bottom line, I suspect adoption is going to be quite patchy. I could be wrong, but I really, really do think that the good stuff in our industry is probably 2 to 5 years away from maturity. Another myth. With the latest AI advancements, is there going to be a material reduction in the number of lawyers? In-house, I actually do think that's possible, but in the short term, probably not. And I'm not convinced yet on law firms. Again, I acknowledge my bias, but my thinking here is the most available and likely deployment of this kind of technology for private practice lawyers is enterprise software. MS 365, Copilot, Google Productivity Suite for a lot of in-house teams, and application-specific legal technology tools. The stack so far is actually developing in exactly the way that we told the market we thought it would at the beginning of this year. So you have enterprise software, Microsoft primarily, certainly for firms, a lot of in-house teams as kind of like a foundation delivery channel. You then have vendors, even really big ones like Thomson Reuters and Lexis, needing to integrate in some way. And then you have destination apps for legal tech looking like an increasingly less viable business model. I also think the technology is going to change the mix of skills as well as the business model itself, because you cannot operate long-term a productivity model at scale when the method of delivery changes. And the other thing is that there are definitely going to be winners and losers between firms and other players. So that then begs the question, what does a law firm or legal service provider of the future look like? And obviously my lens is more focused on the law firm of the future. This is something that we also looked at as part of our ML task force. And the insights here are actually from that time. So back in 2017. So though in my view, surprisingly still solid, given the passage of time and the course of technology. I'm not going to draw out all of the points here, but the overarching themes you'll see are increasingly tech and data enabled, legal and non-legal services, and alternative business models. And of course, one very specific element we did call out back then was the increasing impact of ML and its packaging up into end-to-end solutions alongside the delivery of ML-enabled legal services or legal judgment services. It's worth calling out another bias that I have. The purpose of my team, the purpose of Baker ML, is in fact to pioneer ML-enabled legal judgment as a business model for Baker McKenzie. So in other words, pilot new business models that combine the firm's expertise and data with machine learning and other advanced AI. Initially, that included traditional predictive ML and some data mining using earlier foundation models. And we have certainly been experimenting in recent years with a range of commercial and open source foundation models since before the release of ChatGPT. It's also probably worth noting where we operate, how we operate. We're across 3 verticals, and we have a defined KPI across each of those, right? As you would imagine, law firms have a very narrow ROI window. So we have client-facing work, internal business decision-making, and social impact. And I'm not here today to sell any services, because the purpose of today's keynote is more to share some bigger picture strategy notes and market observations. But just to kind of give you a picture of the kind of work that we do, let me just mention a couple of external facing projects that we're currently working on. So Baker McKenzie is known for its market leading global tax work, particularly for technology companies for whom we do have this very deep industry and client specific expertise. And that drives a lot of the value of that work. So one example of the matters that we're involved in right now is partnering with our transfer pricing practice and their clients to institutionalize that value and to automate certain parts of the workflow. For instance, to support comparable company analysis. Similarly, we run many big multi-practice global retainers for large technology, consumer, and other clients. And over the course of the years of those kinds of retainers, we've developed pretty valuable client-specific playbooks. So we're working with our employment and other teams and their clients to pilot retrieval augmented draft advice generation for those clients for routine queries. And then we're also using RAG to see if we can scale delivery of customized playbooks for emerging high impact regulations for many of our clients, such as around the EU Digital Services Act. And then internally, in that internal vertical, we are primarily focused on improving billing narratives right now to improve profitability, but also to significantly improve the client experience. I'm also happy to share that 1/3 of my team's resource allocation is actually reserved for social impact projects as well, because our firm did not want to bake ML into our internal decision making and our client facing services and then leave our pro bono and social impact program behind. So we do take on about 1/3 of our team time's worth for social impact. And here's just one example of work in this space. So we're the law firm data science partner for this client consortium that is focused on improving diversity, equity, inclusion in the patent practice and the inventorship space. And for that project, we're actually using a combination of traditional predictive ML as well as newer foundation models. Okay, but enough about Baker McKenzie. Let's talk about you. What should you be doing? And I really, really do think that there is a window for maturing on those really good use cases. So now is that time to fix the plumbing and to build the skills and the capability and getting the non-legal skills that you need specifically. Lawyers will not be able to do that themselves. They just don't have the skills. And I say this as someone who is a lawyer by training. They just don't have the skills to understand the art of the possible or the technology in most cases. And that's actually one of the key reasons that Baker McKenzie decided to invest in Baker ML. You know, there was this real need for a multidisciplinary capability. So calling out a few points here. On the strategy front, you really need to decide, where do I want to play? You know, are you a fast follower? Are you at the pointy end? I think you have to be one of those because the laggards are going to lose. What's the product? Really important question. Is this a quality play? Is this more of an efficiency play? For us, we think the real commercial opportunity is to create these new ML-enabled legal judgment services rather than focusing on just automating parts of the existing value chain, the existing services. But we do need to pursue those efficiency plays to build capability in the short term and to generate enough ROI to keep this venture going. On capabilities, you know, I think skills are going to largely determine strategy because a lot of the tech is pretty accessible. So the question is, like, do you have what you need from a people and skills perspective to access the market now? Or if alternatively you're working with a lot of vendors, and I think all of us are going to be working with vendors and are working with certain vendors, you know, what do those vendors add? There's the whole training of the next generation of lawyers piece. Legal skills will change. ML literacy and skills will be in the mix. And then, of course, there's various dimensions of risk and governance to consider. Now, if you are a key decision maker in the space, I really can't underscore enough the importance of keeping track of the wider market and the wider technology stack. I think for most, it will be enough just to keep an eye on 3 layers. Number one, have a basic understanding of the available commercial models in the market from both the big tech and the emerging AI startups. Just generally get a grip on what are they, how is the market, both the legal market and the broader market, receiving them? How are they viewing their relative strengths and weaknesses? And so on the commercial side, the big ones include OpenAI's GPT and Google's Palm 2. And then the other point is, you know, I think you really, really need to focus on the kind of enterprise cloud software piece. That's number 2 layer. Understand what foundation capabilities are going to be baked into MS365 or G Suite or whatever productivity tools you use, because there's going to be a lot of generic capabilities like Doc Q&A that are going to be baked in there. And you've got to figure out, is that enough for our use case, or do we need to buy some application layer over top of that? And then that there is this legal tech layer. I think you should assume at this point that most, if not all, of your existing vendors and alternative vendors will build these models into their products or have already started building these models into their products. And as expected, we are seeing a highly competitive landscape with the exception of enterprise software. So I'd say the model layer is going to be pretty competitive, and the legal tech layer, I think, will continue to be very competitive. And many others will begin to enter the market with more offerings. One flag I want to draw out is there is still a lot of pressure on vendors to overstate the value of what they're providing over and above just an API call to one of the general models. And I'm not casting judgment here because, we are all trying to succeed here. And I think there is opportunity for every single kind of player in our ecosystem. But if you are a buyer, I think the only way to be a smart buyer is to really do your homework on the base model capabilities that your vendors are building on, and then evaluate the vendor over those base models, which are readily available. And it is completely expected that a vendor will disclose models, and this can be done under NDA as part of the evaluation process. And then, of course, it goes without saying you shouldn't be paying excessive premiums to access this widely available set of capabilities. I would not suggest going all in on any specific vendors or models at this point. The market is still very, very much in flux. Just to kind of give you a sense of how we think about our own investment strategy, we think about it in layers. So a large firm like Baker McKenzie, we are naturally investing in AI capabilities within our general enterprise software and productivity tools. We are will continue to invest in application-specific legal tech. And then we do have some in-house internal capabilities, of which Baker ML is an example. And that's around powering strategic parts of our service lines that are not really things that we could or would buy from the wider market. I would also urge you to really follow the big picture questions in the broader market, really the $1 trillion questions right now in the broader market that are as yet unresolved, because pretty much all of these are going to influence how and to what extent the technologies are commercialized in our own industry, and also how strong or weak your own investments might turn out to be. So for starters, there is a battle being fought right now across the board of who can monetize foundation models. Is it going to be the big incumbents like Google and Microsoft by virtue of its OpenAI partnership? Or will it be other startups like Anthropic and Cohere? The second big question is, where in the stack do you make money? The model layer, the infrastructure layers, the application layer, somewhere else? And then there is the question of commercial versus open source models. Open source, as many of you I'm sure appreciate, has historically spread value between the incumbents and startups. But I think those with scale and distribution might actually be able to take advantage of open source a lot better than some of the startups. There's also this big debate out there right now around big versus small models. The world is inevitably going to exist with both, but do you primarily orbit around large models like GPT, or do smaller models make sense for certain things? And then related to that is the relative usefulness of these large generalized models against fine-tuned versions for different domains or domain-specific models trained from scratch. Open question still. Ultimately, though, I think one of the big questions you should be asking is, what are the competitive moats in this new paradigm? What is your defensible value? Which moats hold true, and where might certain vulnerabilities exist? It's a universal truth, right? That technology shifts always create new opportunities and new risks for businesses. But I think one of the things that we've learned recently is that if AI is everywhere and is now just an API call away from every developer, and if everybody is using the same models, then maybe a lot of the fundamentals of business in our industry and in many others will remain the same. Trust, brand, user experience, scale, network effects, switching costs, go-to-market advantage, domain data, all of these things just kind of rotated to a different technology paradigm. So let me leave you with this, because I think we're sort of hard against the time right now, is what does it mean to be a lawyer, to sell legal services in an AI-enabled world? What is the law firm or the provider of the future? Maybe it's actually some of these old modes, either leveraging them or building them, that are actually going to matter more than ever at this point in time. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Danielle. Looks like I'm having some video difficulties here, but I trust you could all hear me. There I am. Danielle, really, really thought-provoking keynote. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. We don't have time for any questions. I really appreciate it. But I want to remind the group here, to get to our next panel, what you're going to do is click View Schedule, log out of this session, but not out of AirMeet, right? Click on View Schedule. And the next session is going to be 30 minutes after the hour. And it is the business case for AI justifying investment in a future we don't quite yet understand. Danielle, again, thank you very much. Very thought-provoking. See you all in about 13 minutes. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. It was my pleasure.